Emily, thank you so much for hosting us. It's great. Tanya, it's been a pleasure. Love working with you. And we actually called this From Holocaust to Hefner, secretly between us. I just have to always say thank you to my husband for coming out. He left our 3 girls at home in Chicago, and he came out for the night.
And they thank you, too.
And they thank me, too, yeah. And our whole crew at Arcade, and Liza, and just everyone who came out tonight. It's wonderful. Oh, my, I see an old friend. Oh, great. Anyway, so right now I'm going to read you an excerpt from my novel. It's a short part of the prologue, and it's 1926 in Chicago. You're going to meet young Julian Klein, who was then known as Yaakov Klein, and he was raised as an Orthodox Jew whose true religion is art. So in this scene, it's going to be a scene from the prologue. Here, Yaakov, at 13, has just stolen his 18th book from the Chicago Public Library. And it's a Klimt, and he's on his way to meet the rabbi. Holding the art book close to his chest, Yaakov ran the 18 blocks from the library to the cheder, the dank, windowless classroom where he studied 6 days a week with the rabbi and other boys from his community. If only the rabbi could know that Yaakov cared nothing about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob except to paint them. If he could only, he could paint the sacrifice of Isaac in Abraham's hands. If only he could paint the beautiful Rachel with her long, thick black hair and those full breasts that tempted Jacob, making him work 7 years, day and night, like an ox, just to know her. How many times did Yaakov paint the scene in his head at night or daydream in the classroom while the rabbi droned on? If only he could paint all of his favorite biblical stories, but it was as forbidden as worshiping the golden calf. The images were allowed only in his head and in his heart. His hands were bound and restrained. Painting was breathing, and Yaakov was suffocating. But one day he knew things would be different. Yaakov told no one about the art books. He had friends, boys he had grew up with, but none could be trusted not to tell the rabbi that he broke the 8th commandment 18 times. He patted the treasured book inside his coat as he nervously opened the classroom door, knowing before he crossed the threshold exactly what was waiting for him. Yaakov Klein, you are late again, the rabbi shouted when he entered the room 6 minutes after the other boys. I'm sorry. Yaakov kept his gaze glued to the scratched-up wood floor. You're always sorry. I'm really not sorry, Yaakov muttered under his breath. What? Nothing. As Yaakov walked over to his desk, a leg stuck out into the aisle and tripped him on purpose. Yaakov went flying, and so did Gustav Klimt. The boys laughed until they saw the rabbi bend over and pick up the stolen book. Then there was dead silence. Yaakov Klein, the class troublemaker, was in trouble again. What is this? The rabbi demanded, his eyes blazing as he held up the book. And where did you get it? Yaakov knew better than to speak. Answer me. Yaakov stared up at the rabbi, who was tugging angrily on his long, scraggly beard, waiting. He stole a glance at the boys around him, who were half worried for him and half thinking, better him than me. It's a book, he said slowly. Don't tell me what I already see. Tell me what I don't. Yaakov paused long enough to muster his courage. It's a book about art. It doesn't belong here. The rabbi wagged an angry finger. The same angry finger he used whether he was discussing commentary or Torah or doling out discipline. That finger was loaded. Eyeing the finger, Yaakov whispered, I don't belong here, Rabbi. Don't belong here, mocked the rabbi, who was nearing 80 or 90, no one knew for sure. He opened and quickly slammed shut the book on Klimt, the loud clap echoing throughout the musty room. His dark eyes behind thick glasses blazed as he wagged that finger in double time. Barely 14 years old, you think you know about life, but you know nothing. Yaakov quickly glanced at the other boys, his friends. No one said a word. He saw the terror in their eyes, but suddenly, strangely, he felt none inside his own body. He took a few steps forward and stood defiantly before the rabbi. I will show you something about life. The rabbi's eyes widened with disbelief at his insolent student, but there was something else in those black eyes that Yaakov saw immediately, which the rabbi could not conceal: curiosity. The rabbi, a teacher, a father of 8, and grandfather of 30, was only a man after all. Yaakov did not wait for a response. He quickly reached inside his desk and took out the piece of paper that he had been hiding for several months. He handed it to the rabbi. "This I drew for you." The rabbi took the paper and held it with both hands, first at arm's length and then up into the light. Slowly, he brought the drawing close to his face. It was a picture of the rabbi, alone, praying in his study. His large white tallis, a hand-woven shawl with thick black stripes, was draped like a cape over his shoulders. His tefillin, phylacteries, were wrapped tightly around his forehead and arm. His heavy hooded eyes bulged, not with the wrath of a dissatisfied teacher, but with the joy of morning prayer. It was an intense, intimate moment that Yaakov had captured. The rabbi tore his gaze away from the image and stared at Yaakov. Known as a man who could scold like a snake and reduce a boy to tears with a mere glare, the rabbi was, for the first time, speechless, that finger hanging limply at his side. There was well over a million of witnesses as the rabbi stood in silent awe of his worst student's God-given talent. That look was all Yaakov needed to confirm what he already knew. He was chosen. And now we're going to have some fun.
On another subject, definitely. Memoir of an Independent Woman, An Unconventional Life Well Lived, which from this point on will be referred to as Memoir, is really it's more than one book. It's really 15 or 16 different books under one cover, because it turns out that there's not just one Tanya, there are many Tanyas. The book was originally titled Letters to the Child I Never Had. For business reasons, Skyhorse Publishing decided to change it to Memoir, for very good reasons, I might add. But it is still written in the form of an open letter to Natasha, the daughter that the author, me, Tanya, did not have. My life was unconventional in many ways. When the 8 siblings of the Grossinger family from Baligrad, Poland, came to America in the early 1900s, 4 of them splintered to New York, and that was the part of the family that became the owners and the founders of Grossinger Hotel that opened in 1914. It's a very tiny farmhouse in upstate New York in the Catskills, and grew to be the largest, most famous Jewish resort in the world. The other 4 siblings went to Chicago. My father, Max, was a first cousin to the Chicago siblings. He came to America in 1921, having met my mother in Vienna, where she was a student. And they married, they came to Chicago. They didn't have a child, me, until 1937, which was rather strange in that period of time. Unfortunately, my dad died when I was 6 months old. So my mother was left a 38-year-old widow, single parent. In those days, you didn't write stories about these successful women. 2 years after that, we moved to Los Angeles, where she reinvented herself as Madame Savonnier. I have no idea what it means. I have no idea why. But she became the general manager of a famous millinery boutique called Mr. John on Rodeo Drive. I went to a bilingual boarding school. I came home on Sundays and went to Christian Science Sunday School. I didn't know I was Jewish until I was 8 years old and moved to Grossinger's. We moved to Grossinger's because at the end of World War II, Jenny Grossinger, the name most famously associated with the hotel, decided that this might be the time to internationalize the clientele. My mother was charming, beautiful, cultured, 1 year shy of her PhD in philosophy, spoke 13 languages, and more to the point, bore the Grossinger name. Jenny said to my mother, and Tania will have a family. She lied. But anyway, that's how I found myself at Grossinger's when I was 8 years old. Discovered I was Jewish, so I traded in being blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. So I wasn't going to inherit the earth, but I would be one of the chosen people. So I considered it to be a fair trade. I had an incredible growing up existence at Grossinger's. I'm not going to go into it now. That's what growing up at Grossinger's is all about. But I was exposed to people from all walks of life and some of the greatest people of our century, both especially in the entertainment world. As a kid, I don't think I had a meal with my mother actually until I was 19, but I also had dinner with Jackie Robinson and Eddie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds, and knew that they should not have gotten married the night before. And Rocky Marciano trained at Grossinger's, and I had the best of live entertainment, all the athletic facilities, and anything I could eat, which really I should not have taken such good advantage of. At 15, I went to Brandeis University, where I studied psychology under the aegis of Dr. A. Maslow, the great humanistic psychologist, and was JFK's student guide when he was a senator for Massachusetts. Not long after, I endured a brief but turbulent marriage in Detroit. Then I became a beach bum in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, where it was the small fishing village that we would all love to run away to whenever we have problems. Came back to New York, became director of broadcast promotion for Playboy magazine and the Playboy Club, spent time with Hugh Hefner, the Playboy Bunnies, of which I was not one, Ayn Rand, Timothy Leary, Gene Shepard, Norman Mailer, anybody who was important I crossed paths with at the time. At the same time that I worked for Playboy, I ended up launching Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique, and all I can say at the moment is that working for Playboy and Betty Friedan at the same time deserves the space I give it in the book. I dabbled a bit in the supernatural. I went through a Macumba exorcism in Rio de Janeiro. I became a travel writer. I was Arthur Fromer's travel correspondent at large on the Travel Channel and Sally Jesse's travel correspondent at large in TalkNet. But my book is more than people I've known and adventures I've had by me. It's also a personal odyssey. And I talk about my rocky relationship with my mother, who was my emotionally distant mother, I might add, a long-lived love affair with a married man, and my decision to be childless by choice. Much more to it, but not tonight.
All right.
So,
with 3 teenage girls, I'm sort of understanding your decision these days.
No, she didn't mean it. She didn't mean it. Okay, I think now I ask you questions, or you ask me questions, and then I ask you questions.
That's fine. Tania.
Yes.
What motivated you really to write this memoir?
When Growing Up at Grossinger's was re-released by Skyhorse Publishing, and I was doing interviews, people ended up as we got toward the end of the interview, what did you do after that? And I had a lot to say. And it occurred to me at that point that maybe I had a lot to say, not only because of the people I met and the inside stories, what I discovered about them that perhaps other people didn't know, but the realization, I didn't grow up saying I want to be unconventional when I grow up. I just, as life came to me, as I came to life, I discovered that taking the road less traveled sometimes is much more exciting than the familiar. And I wanted to talk about that. Fortunately, Skyhorse Publishing thought it was a good idea too. So I did it. I felt that I had something to contribute. And I also wanted to learn something about myself. And I thought that perhaps, when you get to a point in life when there's more to look back at than forward to, maybe it's time to put connect the dots and see who you were, who you are, and don't even think about where you're going. So I did my best. I'm not sure I was successful, but I had a heck of a good time trying. Oh, I'm asking you. Oh, I'm ready to ask you questions now? Oh, sure. You were an investigative journalist in Israel during the Intifadas, doing some very tough times. How did you then turn it around and start to write about degenerate art? But first, why don't you explain what degenerate art is? It's not art written by degenerates, or painted by degenerates, I don't think. Go ahead.
Well, just to take you back, before I moved to Israel in 1992, I was the managing editor of a women's magazine in Chicago, and I was sent on an assignment to cover the Degenerate art exhibit at the Art Institute of Chicago. And I was a journalist by day, but I would write fiction and working on a manuscript at night. So I was into about 150 pages into another manuscript, and I walked into that exhibit, and I literally stopped in my tracks. I couldn't breathe. I knew I had found my story. I'm a daughter of a Holocaust survivor, and I had never known this tiny part of Holocaust history, and that Hitler and his henchmen went after the artist with such a vengeance before he went after everyone else. And I had learned that Hitler, before he became Hitler, was a painter, and not a very good one. He was rejected, and when he came into power, he actually brought others who were also artists who also had been rejected, and they went after the German expressionists with a vengeance that no one had ever seen before. And so I wanted to understand, how can someone be, a painter and a madman at the same time? And it was like the story I had to really delve into.
Now, the title of your book is Fugitive Colors. Why?
Fugitive colors is actually an artistic term, and it's the impermanence of colors. So it's almost as if you imagine a kaleidoscope with all the colors, and then they start to disintegrate. And what's left is the exposure, the truth. And so that's what it is. It's almost runaway colors.
You explore the whole concept of talent. People who don't have talent, people who do have talent, and to what extremes they will go to get the talent. Can you expand a little bit on that, please?
I think the theme in Fugitive Colors is, how far would you go for your passion? Would you kill for it? Would you destroy others who get in your way? And what happens if you have the inclination, you want to be a painter, you love art, but you don't have the talent. So one of my main characters, Felix von Brito, is based loosely after Adolf Hitler. And he's young, and he's in his 20s, and he's from Berlin and moves to Paris and is part of the whole bohemian art movement. But really his two best friends have the talent and he doesn't. So a woman gets in the way, and you think that that's the problem, but it's really not. It's about talent, those who have it, those who don't, and how far you would go to obtain it.
When you were writing this book, did you go to Berlin and to Paris, or use archives or interviews or what?
Yeah, I went to Paris several times, and the research was about 5 years of research. I was a reporter in the Jerusalem Post, and I would work on this book on the sidelines. And I had met, interestingly, in Jerusalem, a young man who was German, and he had moved to Jerusalem for a short period, and his grandfather was a Nazi, and he had come to Jerusalem. He actually ended up marrying an Israeli girl, but there was an aristocratic family who lived in the area that I describe in my book. So I spent hours with him in discussion, and a lot of testimonials of expressionist artists at the time to really give the flavor and the feel of what was going on.
You also concentrated at a certain point on stolen art. Now, the Holocaust is 70 years old.
Yes.
Why is stolen art still so relevant today?
I mean, Hitler's war began with art, and it's ironic that it's ending there as well. And basically 70 years, most of the Holocaust survivors have passed, but yet this is the legacy, this is what lives on. I mean, I always say if only art could talk. There are paintings all over the world in major museums and in major collections that don't belong to the people who bought them. The history belongs to someone else. And so we have grandchildren of those who own those paintings who are fighting back now. So this makes front page news, and that's why it continues.
I think maybe now we open the floor.
I wanted to ask you a few things.
Please.
Yeah.
What took you so long? No.
What was it like working for Betty Friedan? You know, I know the Feminine Mystique came out, and she had a lot of, she was known in the press as very difficult.
Well,
was that how it really was?
Yes. Yeah, no, it was difficult, but not in as horrible a way as one might presume. Like I presume, for example, I actually got the account because I had worked with her when she had an excerpt in McCall's magazine, and I was doing some PR for that. And the publicist at Norton, the publisher, threatened to quit if she had to work with Betty again. So they decided they would hire me because at least she would listen to me. You know, Betty was one of the most passionate women I've ever met, and really not so much passionate for Betty Friedan because that was so beneath her. She was going to change the world. And Betty Friedan could be second, but the world came first. She spoke my mind like this, and she went like that, and she was terrible in front of a camera. She wouldn't give anybody a chance to speak. She would interrupt. She was rude. If someone disagreed with her, I mean, it's their show. They're the host. They're allowed to disagree. She never let anyone finish. It was awful. But I said to her, look, you need me. I am willing to work with you, but you have got to listen. One quick anecdote to illustrate what an experience this was. I placed her on a TV talk show called Girl Talk. And I thought this would really be terrific because the host, Virginia Graham, I knew from Grossinger's, and she had been very, very good to me. And it was a panel of 3 people, plus Virginia. And true to form, anytime a woman disagreed with her, it was awful. Betty got so frustrated that at the first commercial break, she stands up and she says to Virginia Graham, if you don't let me have my say, I'm going to say the word orgasm 10 times on camera. You know how long ago that was, right? But as Norton, the first publishing figure I think was 5,000 copies. No one expected it to be what it was. Now, a kind Betty Friedan, one. Whenever there was a meeting of the Society of Magazine Writers, which is the prelude to American Society of Journalists and Authors, she would bring me, introduce me, and say, if it wasn't for Tania Grossinger, 95% of the population would never have heard of the Feminine Mystique. And she wanted me to get freelance accounts. She also used to I sent her on the road, and they wouldn't pay money to have escorts, so I put her in touch with former boyfriends in various cities that I had, and she would write me Jewish mother letters. If I knew I was going to write this book, I would have saved those letters. You shouldn't see Alan, he's too egotistical, he's not right for you. What's wrong with Seymour? He's such a nice guy. Betty Friedan. Who knew?
All right, so from Betty Friedan to Hugh Hefner, was it ever really uncomfortable for you working there?
No, you know, it really wasn't. And this was a question that I thought about for about 10 seconds before I took a job because I was out of work and they offered me a decent salary. The bunnies were not coerced. The bunnies, some of them actually, you know, were putting themselves through college. They were very, very well protected by management. They were not forced to do anything that they didn't want to do. I'm not talking sexual, I'm talking about promotions, anything. They were very well regarded. They were taken care of as professionals. And no, I wasn't, because Hefner, trust me, I was not the Playboy image, but I was their spokesperson for the magazine. Nobody questioned it. Whenever I did something particularly good or honorable, I got a raise. He had hired a lot of women. He treated them well. There was no such thing as any unequal pay for equal work. For that, I give Hefner credit. For firing me, because at one point, when he was in California, there was a young starlet who wouldn't go to bed with him. And you want to know why a young girl wouldn't go to bed with Hefner in California, and the director of broadcast promotion in New York got fired. You'll have to read the book.
So lastly, you write about your rocky relationship with your mother. Did you find writing this cathartic for you?
Let's put it this way. I had an emotionally distant mother. I think if I ask women here to raise their hands how many had rocky relationships with their mother, I think most people would say yes. So that's not unique. My mother was a genius at reinvention. She was a genius at keeping secrets. After she died, I came across envelopes of journals, letters, pictures. I will say just this. Sometimes secrets are meant to be secret. And anybody who says that ye shall know the truth and the truth shall make you free, not exactly. Don't count on it. So to answer your question of did I find it cathartic, no, I found it spooky.
So yeah, we wanted to open up the floor to questions. If you have any questions about either of our books. Yes. Yeah.
I'll bring you the microphone, actually. This is for the YouTube video.
You mentioned expressionism. Could you define expressionism per se, and then also why you think of all forms of art, that was the one that Hitler and it was so threatened by as opposed to other forms?
Expressionism is the emotion is painted, not the subject. So, skies could be pink, people can be abstract strokes, and it's what is felt but not what is seen. So that's expressionism. And interestingly, Hitler's, the artist he detested the most was Salvador Dali, because that was the most Hitler type of painter. So, they liked classical, they liked old world, and the expressionists were showcasing wild ideas, and they did not want the German people to, follow these expressionists. And, in any real society where there's a dictator, the first group that's quashed are the artists, the philosophers, the teachers, anyone who can really bring about a change in ideas. So he went after the expressionists first.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
In your real life,
yes,
are you an artist?
I am not an artist. I love art.
Okay.
But I, like my character Julian, if he was made to be a plumber, he'd be painting the pipes. If I have to write. For me, writing is breathing. It really is.
And you do it so well.
You have other questions out there?
He was a painter in Austria first, and so he was house painting.
Mm-hmm.
But they say that he was rejected by an Austrian art school, and the director was Jewish. I don't know if that's exactly true, but that's what they say.
In that article that you read,
Can I just have this?
in the article, in the part of the book which you
Yeah.
read, you mentioned there was 18 blocks and 18 books. Is that high, or 18 going to go all through your?
Well, it is. If you threw out,
Because in 2
yes.
pages, I mean, it's like
No, it wasn't
redundant
18
if it doesn't
blocks.
mean
It
anything.
wasn't 18 blocks, but it was 18 books. This was his 18th
No, you
book.
said, didn't you say he ran 18 blocks?
I think it was 8 blocks, maybe.
Oh, I
yeah,
heard
8 blocks.
18 and then I heard-
Yeah, and then 18 books. But
And why must cheder always be dark and dank?
why?
Or do Hebrew schools?
They don't
It
have
just-
to be. This one happened to be. This one.
This was her Hebrew school.
But I agree.
Her
this was
Hebrew school, yeah, hello.
No, his Hebrew school. I grew up. I went to a Jewish day school. I loved it. But his Hebrew school. Oh, was yours? You said?
Okay.
Oh, you said that your Hebrew school was that way.
No, okay. Let's go more questions, Arlen. I'm sorry. Arthur Levy?
Yeah.
Well, I get an introduction for the question. That's for YouTube. Hello out there, wherever you are. Can I completely switch gears?
You can do whatever you want.
I'm trying to get you
Maybe.
to talk about Jackie. So What do you think Jackie would think of what's going on today in baseball?
The question, I wrote, and the book is so beautifully illustrated by Charles Esperanza, who happens to be here today. We wrote a children's book called Jackie and Me, A Very Special Friendship. I haven't the vaguest idea what Jackie would think about anything. I never even saw him play baseball. My whole relationship with him was, he was my mentor, he was my friend. He wasn't the athlete, he wasn't the icon, he was the human being. Lisa?
So what are you doing these days?
What am I up to these days?
Yeah, what are you up to these days?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure. Well, actually, what I'm doing for the next 4 months is promoting this book. I'm traveling around the country, making appearances. I think I'm still trying to figure out my life, and I wish I could get paid for the privilege. So if anybody has any ideas, please feel free to let me know.
We have time for at least one more.
Going.
Question out
Oh,
there?
Charles.
You mentioned that you've studied Hitler's art and everything that he had done. Do you think that he was maybe one of a kind, or do you see traits in other artists that you kind of can relate to Hitler and how he progressed and what he did?
Are you saying, okay, so to understand your question, I think that, yeah, there are other artists. I think, you know, my character, Felix, was based on Hitler, but he was also based on other artists who have that drive and that inclination to paint, but they really don't have it. And, you know, what do you do? That's one of the themes in the book, is what happens when you have that passion, and that's what you love, but you don't have that talent. You know, can you live with that? And Hitler, you know, was obviously apparent by the way he went after the artist, and not just the artist, but he confiscated art, they looted art, they raped Europe of the greatest treasures, you know, in history. And, you know, you can't completely connect it only to his own rejections, but there was something to it. It was almost like the motor that fueled him. So I don't know if other artists have that same take on it, if they're not talented, but definitely there is something to rejection that causes sometimes bad things. Yeah.
This is going to be the last one.
Yeah.
This is actually not a question, but more of a filling in of the question on expressionism that was raised earlier as to what it is and what triggered in Hitler, who was a second-rate postcard-type painter. We all see them at the street corners. They make lovely drawings of the fountain and whatever, but at the end of the day, it's a painting of a fountain and it's never going to be anything else. Expressionism goes beyond that and tries to pick up your reaction to the fountain, and all you can think of as expressionism, just think of the scream of Munch, and that's expressionism in its perhaps extreme incarnation. But he did not just go after expressionism, nor did he just go after that because he had a rejection, although it is probably a very, very important part of a psycho that we will never understand. But he went over, included in the so-called degenerate art, was all kinds of non-classical work. So in controlling through the political system and other types of the propaganda material and all of that, you control the type of art that people were allowed to appreciate. And it did not include expressionism, and it did not include cubism, and it didn't include all of those things, even post-cubism. And yes, it was confiscated because they didn't like it, but they also confiscated it because it was worth a lot.
Valuable.
Don't think that this was just a quest for anything else in addition to which for money. They used the paintings that they hated. Some of the more extreme versions may have been burnt, but most of them were used to exchange, to get on the black market, to get the paintings that they wanted. So 4 Matisses, which he disdained, were exchanged for a Lucas Cranach, which for him was the epitome of great art. So it's an extraordinarily complicated subject. I don't mean to take over the floor,
No,
but I
it's
happen to be
great.
the granddaughter
You're hired.
of an art dealer, and I am personally very involved in trying to recover stolen art as we speak.
Yes, she
Thank
is.
you.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us this evening. Thank you especially to Lisa and Tanya. Make sure you check out Fugitive Colors and Memoir of an Independent Woman before you leave. They're available over by Collie at the registers. Have a great evening.